Okay, I'm going to switch from this main presentation deck over to our guest presenters deck here in a minute, but just keep our landing page up and clear for everybody so that you understand what we're talking about today and some of the fun things on the horizon we've got. I will next week be quite busy, so I apologize in advance for missing emails and or new and upcoming research. You'll notice I'll be at an elementary school doing career day. I do speak at schools. I also work with high schoolers and middle schoolers on their projects. So if any of you have children who are doing climate related activities and you would like my inputs and or review or me on their podcasts, it's just a little fun thing I like to do. It gets the information flowing in the right direction and encourages for them to reach out to federal people for information just in general. I think there should be a lot more open engagement with the youth. So I've got a career day going on for those in Northern Virginia, CyberCon over there in West Virginia. So there's a couple of different buddies going to that one. I'll be there for a day. Coming right back for Bethesda for the AFCEA EIE. Woo, geez. And that's a fireside chat. Noah's also going to have Stephen Beta there, who's one of my pals from way back at the beginning of Weather. He's on the NOAA AI side of the house. So if you're looking for a really good presentation between the two of them, I cannot emphasize more that you should pick one or two to go to. The West Virginia one, I believe, has free for feds, as does the Bethesda one. And I believe the prior head of Cybercom is going to the West Virginia one. So just some interesting nuggets there. And then, of course, my birthday's coming up, just for everyone's awareness, on the back end of the house there. So we're going to be talking today. We're going to have a guest presentation, Gary Church. So he's with the USDA, but his presentation is going to come from his FEMA engagement side of the house. So it's from a mission assignment, going to be focused on debris clearing and some of the pros, cons of some new efforts underway there. And then I want to make sure I annotate that on the geointelligence side of the house from the Geointelligence ISAC, that we do have the internship forms live. I will be picking my interns. There's already, I believe, 15 submissions and growing. So I will be reviewing all of those personally. The resumes that have been submitted, we have so many that we can take on originally just through the agreement side of the house, and then we'll see about more engagement as we go forward, but it's pretty cool looking at that. The Geointelligence Challenge coin purchase forms will be coming out also later today, so you'll be able to purchase the cool coins that we designed. That was the word I was looking for. Designed a couple of meetings ago. I showcased them to you guys. We're also working on finishing out that collaboration site. The Geointelligence main landing website will also be live. There is a version of it live right now, but we are working on creating a little bit more robust of a landing page to explain what we are, what we're doing going forward in that realm. So some of our topics are going to be bark beetles and warming. So for anybody who's on, this is going to follow the tree presentation. So I think that'll be healthy. Moving in on the $1 billion disaster database update, international weather, quick look, super El Nino 101, what it is, why we care, space weather overview, new sea level rise study that came out that kind of highlights some new threats on the horizon, the seasonal outlook, the 14-day forecast, current conditions, and I've even snuck in a little surprise for everybody, which are the people who are willing to go ahead and stick their necks as far out as humanly possible and do a hurricane forecast for the total number of tropical cyclones anticipated for the Atlantic. We'll see whether or not they're accurate by the end of the season. So with this, I'm going to turn it over to Gary to go ahead and come off of mute, and we're going to go through, well, actually, one second. We're going to go through his slide deck, but I've got to change how I share it. So I'm going to unmute. Oh, you're already muted. You're all good to go. Okay, passing it over to Gary.
Hey, thanks, Sonny, and I appreciate the invitation to share some things that we did in response to Hurricane Helene. And I appreciate the disclaimer too. So I'm a USDA employee, and we are very careful with comms. So the disclaimer is I'm talking from my FEMA mission assignment and not USDA. So they say a picture tells 1,000 words, and I like to use a lot of pictures, but there won't be a lot of words. It's a few slides. So if you have a question, I think Sonny said I had maybe 20 minutes or so. I probably won't use it all. So if you have a question or want me to clarify, please just stick your hand up. I do not mind being interrupted. So this first slide, you can kind of see the damage there. Again, a picture tells 1,000 words. We have really extensive damage all over Western North Carolina, specifically around the Asheville area. It was not just wind events. It was also rain. I think the Arboretum where we did the work actually got a little over 17 inches of rain in just a few hours. So significant impacts that that did include more than just the down debris. So I'll talk a little bit about that and how we reacted there, and then the relationships and what kind of followed. But initially, this started out as a priority project for the City of Asheville. And I think timing had a lot to do with it. That clearing that arboretum probably would not have been their priority mission had it not been coming up on Christmas. And the reason that was so important was the Arboretum does their Festival of Lights. And so this really was an economic mission that really turned into something even more than that, including fuels reduction, riparian area, and dealing with the invasives. And the reason Sonny's managing the slides is speaking of AI, I had a Copilot update today, and for some reason I cannot get the sound to work. So if you want to go to the next slide, and the little short video is our FEMA partner lead there at the time, Ed, and he's going to narrate some of the work that we did, and then we'll kind of go into some of the details.
Basically, this project, pilot project, we were taking down timber from the North Carolina Arboretum. And as you can see in the background, there was thousands and thousands of trees that had blown down from the storm. And as they looked at all this down timber, they said, do we have to put all this down timber in the landfill, or do we have to burn it? They said, maybe there's some other repurposing ways we could use it. The intent was to save, again, tons and tons of wood that would have basically went into the landfill. We could use this for firewood because like 20% of the population in the Asheville, Buncombe County area uses firewood for one of their heating methods. So we decided to cut as much as we could for firewood. And our partner was Team Rubicon, who literally brought in volunteers. We had a big machine that split the wood, cut the wood, and they stacked it up. And then we repurposed approximately 100 tons of wood that was used for the furniture industry, building industry, et cetera. And we donated that to a local vendor that's, again, they had suffered the loss of material from the storm. They didn't have any wood. So we gave them the wood so they could repurpose it. And then last, we had about 2 tons of wood that we donated to the artists. We have multiple groups that's been involved, and it's been a great partnership to see. We have the faith-based community that now is working to let the wood dry out, and they're going to distribute the wood for us. Plus, we had the USDA Forest Service guy that was here, and he would identify, no, we can use this for firewood, no, we can use this for the arts, no, we can use this for lumber. One of the agencies works a lot with the arts community and culture community. So through them, and also through some of the contacts here in Asheville, because they have such a large art community, we were able to identify a gentleman that literally had his shop washed away in the area where all the art studios were. I think the project has wonderful potential to show the communities and show, institutions that FEMA can do these kind of quick turnaround projects that make a big difference.
So Ed mentioned a lot of different partners. I'll kind of go through these and quickly highlight what each one of them did. As I go through this, I think really what I want to pull out of this and highlight is this project became more than just an economic issue. It didn't save a lot of money, but it didn't make a lot of money, but it saved a lot of money. But it took a lot of work with partners and a lot of coordination that probably would have been even a little more successful had we done some coordination up front. So replication, I think, is one of the things that has and will come out of this for future events. But obviously FEMA was there. They coordinated and had the money. Most of the money that came from FEMA went to the Corps of Engineers, who, again, is a partner. And when I say partner, it may be a federal agency and not for profit. It could be industry. They were a partner, even though they lost standing and decked wood for their sawmills. One particular sawmill lost everything on his yard. They actually helped us deliver firewood. I mean, the industry folks stepped up really well. North Carolina Arboretum, they were really big, really bending over backwards. A lot of things to protect that they needed to get out of this just to get their their City of Lights, or their light show up for Christmas time. Team Rubicon, you heard Ed mention them. They really were the key to this. As the Corps of Engineers got the wood, they cut it up from the Arboretum and they delivered it to a secondary site. And Team Rubicon actually ran the chainsaws, they ran the firewood machine that you saw there, did a lot of the hard work that was needed to make this project successful. American Red Cross stepped up early on. They paid for the equipment that we use, specifically the firewood machine. And then, you know, the Mennonite Disaster Services and all the faith-based, they all really worked together to help load firewood, unload firewood, find the customers that were in need. And we really wanted to focus on the people that were impacted the most. And so between the faith-based organizations, some of the not-for-profits, the private sector folks, industry folks, and the Boy Scouts of America, they were really involved in the distribution of that firewood. And you can see the pictures there, pretty much all of them. And I probably missed a partner or two, but I think I got most of them. And you can go to the next slide. So again, this started out, you know, really as an economic project to get the light show going for the Arboretum. I mean, that place services about, I think, 6,000 people a year. So it's a major tourist event. And us getting the roads and the trails cleared in time for them just to get the lights up, and especially in time for them to put the show on, was extremely important for the City of Asheville. So it started out, you know, just as clearing for the Arboretum and really grew after that. You can go to the next slide, please. So I'm just going to spend a little bit of time here. How this started. So FEMA called USDA and they had a mission assignment that, you know, what can we do with this wood? Working with the Forest Service, we already have firewood banks, and everybody thought, okay, well, it's just going to be firewood. Well, when we got in here and started looking at most of this down timber, it was way too big for the firewood machine. And just being the natural resource director for USDA, I knew a lot of the sawmills that were around the area, and I started talking to them, asking, you know, what would be a good outlet for this wood. I never thought that they would need the wood. There was so much down wood. I figured that their yards would be filled with salvage, but there was just so much going on. People were really, you know, kind of deer in the headlights for the first couple of months there, that we were able to get this wood to some of the sawmills. Like I said earlier, one particular sawmill had lost their whole inventory of wood. So getting these mills back up, you know, the wood industry and timber industry is a big part of the Western North Carolina. So it went from firewood, which we provided a lot of firewood, and I've got some stats that you'll see on the next slide. Also, quite a bit of timber that was used for the sawmills, you know, and most of this timber in this area is used for furniture and that type of thing. And, you know, we worked on this, I guess, probably from about October. It went through most of the end of October through November. Until the Arboretum got their lights show up and going and got most of the debris removed. And then the project really shifted after that. And I continued to stay on and work for FEMA, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. Let's go to the next slide. So here you can see the firewood machine. You know, I'm really talking about stats here, but I think it's pretty cool to show what some of the artists are doing with the wood. And the firewood machine, that's Team Rubicon's Bobcat in the background on that top picture. But like I said, it really didn't make a lot of money, but here's where it saved a lot of money. So all of those tons of wood being removed from the Arboretum would have had to go to a local stump dump. Every load that went into a stump dump cost $225. So we ended up saving about $3,000. I think it was probably a little more than that in stump dump savings, but we had 80 cords firewood for victims there, about $23,000 of lost inventory, either from the artist community or from the wood community. I think really what came out of this project, though, other than the cost savings, was just the relationships that were built with the local counties. The Forest Service and the State Forestry Service already worked pretty close together, but there were really a lot of others that kind of jumped in. And I think we've got something that we can replicate if this ever happens, or we can actually work with other areas. And in MJ Wilson's own, and she's already talked to a couple of places and set me up with some folks to talk to that, is this possible? You can do some pre-planning. And I think that you really can. If you've experienced it one time, I think it's pretty easy to set those discussions up. And I'll talk a little bit about that and what kind of came out of that. Really, probably more important than the firewood. So if you'll go to the next slide. So talking with FEMA, as this project ended, we really started seeing some the future, I guess, risks of all this wood being on the ground. And I don't like to read slides, but I am going to read through some of these stats here in just a second. But in January, if y'all remember the Palisades fire, well, at the same time, North Carolina had a couple of fires, and they were pretty significant, and we almost lost a town. And this was debris from Helene. You think about that wood laying there through the winter, you wouldn't think it would be much of a fire threat because it really didn't have time to dry out. But it ended up being the leaves and the smaller limbs that caught fire. And we had some pretty high ladder flames. And what the risk is going forward is now that bigger timber starting to dry out. And so FEMA typically in the past had not had a process to really look at what those future threats are. And I think that's changing now. And some of the FEMA partners have actually hosted what we call it a fire summit, where we talked about all the different things that we can do to come together as a community. And a lot of this ground's on Forest Service ground, and I'll talk a little bit about that, but not all of it. But what we can do, working with partners, working with nonprofits, some of the disaster money that became available either through the Forest Service and some of the authorities that we got to work off of Forest Service land, but mostly through the state. And so a few things came out of that project. But what I want to highlight is what the risks are. So if you remember in 2016, the fires that burned through Gatlinburg, Tennessee, about 17,000 acres, 14 fatalities, 2,000 lost structures. And that was, it was a pretty dry year, but you've got to think about the tons of acre of debris that was there. So during 2016, we had about 7.6 tons per acre. After Helene, we're looking at 54 plus tons of acre of debris that's on the ground right now. And that's not just Forest Service land, that's Forest Service and private. And as we start to see more drought conditions and drier conditions in 2 or 3 years, we're going to have some catastrophic risks if we don't deal with them now. And that's what we're doing. Go to the next slide. So through that fire summit and working with FEMA and partners, we've actually started working, and this is not just U.S. Forest Service. And again, even though I'm a Forest Service employee, this is through the partnership and the FEMA mission assignment that we've been able to achieve some of the successes that we've seen so far. And the counties have really stepped up too, especially Buncombe County and others. We're starting to look at debris removal. The Forest Service right now is putting together a $60 million project that's going to use Columbia helicopters to move debris. We'll stack that debris up, and then it'll be for sale and available for local sawmills. With the recent Champion chip mill that went out of business, we don't have an outlet for a lot of that smaller material. So the counties and USDA, NRCS, and others have stepped up to help a couple of private mill owners put together a biochar unit. And that green unit right there, it's a really small one. But in reality, they've got some big ones that move a lot of wood. So we're starting to see more investment in biochar. This biochar is actually going to be used to go back on some of the farmland that was washed away. And I'll talk about the riparian area work that actually followed this in just a second. But I think the big piece that came out of the what FEMA-Led and the counties are sticking up, in fact, Buncombe County is the one that's leading this effort, is we know that there's going to be fires regardless of how much debris we're able to pick up. And so there's a systems called Fire Alert is just one example, but they're wildfire alert systems that use AI and machine learning, and they can detect wildfire. So they can detect smoke plumes, they identify it, they send out notifications so that suppression efforts can be put into place a lot quicker. So with the work that we are doing with the with our pods and with some of the other debris removal with the alert systems, I think we're going to be able to protect a lot of the structures that we were not able to during those 2016 Gatlinburg fires, even with the significant amount of fuel loading. And then I'll say just one bullet, and I've got this wrapped up in the last slide, but these partnerships, we started focusing on the wildfire risk and debris removal, but it quickly ran into riparian stream work. So we're working with counties and local folks, providing seedlings, providing river cane. River cane is a big priority for the tribes. And we've been doing river cane restoration. And what we found out is where these streams had been scoured because of the flooding, those areas that had been treated and were actually restored with river cane actually sustained a lot of that river, scouring. So we're going to have a big focus on that. And it's not just on Forest Service land, it's on private land. And we're supporting that through some of our authorities. And then I think the big piece is we've always had a pretty big invasive problem, especially around those riparian areas. We've, to make lemonade out of lemons, most of that scouring allowed a lot of those invasives to go downstream, unfortunately, for South Carolina. But for North Carolina, we've almost got a clean slate. So we've been able to use that as an advantage to treat some of these invasive species issues. So so we can go to the next slide and I'll wrap it up and have to take some questions. So really look at, again, pictures tell 1,000 words. This is some areas that had been had some riparian work done on them. Some debris was removed. But if you look out across, that's the Pisgah National Forest. If you look out across that, eventually we want that to be the landscape again. So, a lot of this work and this debris removals allowing reforestation activities, that riparian work. But the big thing is getting that fuel load up. Y'all know what happens when you get really hard fires. It burns the soil up. The topsoil is removed. It really makes it hard to have reforestation activity. So all of this working together, working with our state and local partners, I think is really going to benefit the recovery efforts over the next 10 years. And I would say we owe a lot of the success to some of these efforts that started off with this little bitty tiny firewood project, led to the relationship building, where we're able to do a lot of this work. And I think the future piece of this is, how do we replicate it? And I think, you never know what event's going to happen. Is it a wind event? Is it a fire event? But understanding what your priorities are, who your partners are, having that person you remember from the firewood project that you remember you worked with a few years ago. Hey, can we call this person up and maybe replicate some of this work in another part of the region or in another part of the country? So, at the end of the day, it wasn't about firewood only. It was about helping the community, saving money, helping those local towns, helping the industry. And then really the restoration and recovery efforts. But at the end of the day, replication when these events happen. And I think this was a big success. And, appreciate all the partners that have stepped up. And, MJ's really connected me with a lot of folks, and I appreciate that too. So with that, I probably left a lot of things out. I kind of went through this pretty quickly. But I will open it up for questions, and I think a picture tells 1,000 words. So if you see anything on there that you want me to expand on, let me know, and I will be glad to discuss. And I don't know how much time I have, Sonny.
You're good. You got a good solid couple minutes. MJ's plopped a question in here. Were you aware of any issues with mom and pop firewood vendors being adversely impacted by the significant surplus of free firewood?
No, I don't know of any. In fact, there's still a pretty significant firewood shortage. We're working right now just with the Cherokee tribe. They use a lot of firewood, and they're still short. They're looking for firewood to come on their yards, and we work closely with those firewood banks. And I haven't specifically gone and visited them, but since the lead for that program works on my staff, he has not brought it up. And if there were any issues, I know he certainly would.
And then I think you can probably see the chat, but Curtis plopped in there his contact to be able to connect about some of the long-term efforts during Hurricane Helene. I see that Jeff's gone ahead and raised his hand. Yes, over to you.
Sorry, that was not intended.
Psych. Okay, cool. Just other notes that have come in have been some positives from Perry on like understanding the length of time it takes to recover from a disaster of this scale and obvious ecological impacts across the board. So I want to give you a huge thanks and a thanks to MJ for connecting you. It's always important when we deal with these levels of disasters, everything from wildfires onward. People think that the debris just gets cleared and gets dumped somewhere, and they don't really think about the cascading impact. The same thing with sandbagging. Sandbagging in an actual disaster, the sandbags often end up as a hazard in and of themselves, having been contaminated with backflowing waters, sewage, and all the rest of the debris that can come out of damaged property. And those all have to go somewhere, and they all came from somewhere. So when we're doing any disaster planning, keeping in mind that we can benefit the general area, as long as we are creative and innovative with our approach, that, we could do more with what we've got going on. So thank you, Gary. I'm going to make sure that everyone gets a PDF copy of your slides with the link. So I appreciate you immensely. We're going to move through the rest of the conversation today. So I owe you guys some information on the Super El Nino. Quite a few of you have reached out about that. So we'll roll straight into the presentation deck. Bark beetles. If you didn't know what they are, they're bugs. They're small, they burrow, they love dead trees, but they also are becoming problematic because some of the trees going through drought cycle are obviously dying off at significantly faster rates across the western half of the United States and Europe. So Europe came out with this fascinating study that obviously correlates the issue of beetles and warmer climates. This is prevalent across the board with a lot of the insects we don't like. This is going to be a growing issue. This study highlights a lot of the different area that's going to be impacted. What they do is not necessarily they themselves killing the tree, but they invite in the secondary problems, things like fungus, that can then smother the tree, subsequently resulting in premature decay for some of those that might have been able to rebound. So you'll just notice that we have over 600 species of these little critters here in the US and Canada. There's 200 species alone in just California. So yes, this is a problem for us. This is why we look internationally for studies on problem sets that are going to be arising. So it's not just your heat waves and your weather events, it's your secondary impacts on the living environment that can subsequently surprise you when it comes to managing your vegetation. So when we're talking about being able to restore from floods, fires, winds, it is really important to think about what we're going to be doing with the loss of our trees going forward and where we're planting the new trees, understanding these threats are on the rise. So the $1 billion disaster set that Climate Central, who now holds a significant population of NOAA employees that were let go previously, to be aware that they have created the entirety of the database accessibility for our previous $1 billion disasters. So you'll notice here the beautiful graphics are all relabeled with Climate Central's stats, and all of the information's been updated through 2025 now. There's also some new studies that have come out from global insurance companies I included here at the bottom. You guys can play with the hot links when you get the PDF, but it's just to annotate that last year reached some new records for costliest year on record for some of our disasters and how many people died, a pretty substantial amount. However, below the 10-year average. So I'm hoping that we're going to continue the trend of people taking our watches, warnings, and advisories seriously, talking a little bit about what we just went through in Virginia, specifically when it came to our tornado watches. A lot of people weirdly disappointed we didn't get a higher EF category tornado in the region and upset that kids were let out of school early. To not have to be on the roads during the time in which we are anticipating the most severe weather. So to annotate, we give watches, warnings, and advisories in advance of indicators on the horizon of substantial events that could be disruptive or deadly. So we would not want people on the roads. I understand this triggered traffic jams in and of themselves. However, they were notably earlier in the day than they would have been had there been a development later in the day. The last thing you want to do is get on the road while there's a tornado. And or trees going down, because trees are one of our #1 killers for people in their cars, especially during severe weather. So even if we didn't get a tornado, we still got more than 100,000 power outages in the state of Virginia just from that storm. We did get an EF0 attempting to form down there in Manassas. So no, we did not escape all of the tornadoes. And Virginia Beach also had some cyclonic rotation. The Carolinas did see touchdowns. And there were some significant tornadoes the day prior from this exact weather phenomena, as well as a blizzard. So these storms are packing a heavier punch, and it means you're going to see more advocation of awareness because the general population should avoid dying in them. So as we go forward, just be aware, here's all the disaster graphics from NOAA and Climate Central subsequently, because it's a shared database. So I will continue to annotate as such. So you'll just see that they've updated through 2025 with costs. I've gone ahead and included these in the PDF. Whoop, there you go. That you guys will be able to look at, breaking it down by state, breaking it down by event type, and breaking it down by decadal period, so that you're able to really track the frequency of the severity of these events. And to be aware, of course, this is also an indicator because the critical infrastructure is getting notably older. A lot of our stuff was put in more than 50 years ago, which means it's coming up on the end of life cycle anyway. Looking at what's going on over in the UK, yes, we have a heat dome in the US, but guess who else does? See, this is why we look internationally. What's going on over there? It's abnormally warm. What does that mean for them? It also means it's going to mess up our pattern by the time it comes back to us again. We just passed over to them a major cyclone, which was our last major weather event that caused the winter weather freak event for those of us in the DMV area that had severe weather and then an immediate snowstorm on the back end of it. So when we're looking at where these events are going, be aware they're exiting the US, they're going over to Europe, crossing Europe, going into the Asian continent, Russia, and then coming back over into the Pacific, back into the US once again. So when we see abnormal patterns in other countries, we are tracking the wobble in the upper levels because they flow like horses on a carousel, always going in one direction. We will inevitably see what this brings when it comes back to us once more. That'll take a lot longer than you're likely going to be paying attention to it. So I will continue to remind you guys as these come up in the horizon. Where we're at right now with some of our headlines, it's a fun time out there. These are all the headlines from the last week and a half. So you'll see that the U.S. was expecting extreme weather in every state, just about, whether it was some kind of an event, an atmospheric river, the Kona low that was over in Hawaii causing devastating flooding for their areas. They've been in drought. Again, what happens when you're in drought? You will inevitably see a rain. It will be too much rain at once. Your soil will not be able to handle it. Your vegetation will be decaying and subsequently will fall to it. So that's why we've seen so much damage. Looking at some of the other events that we had, record-breaking snowfall over in the Great Lakes region, record-breaking precipitation going on in some of these areas, and of course our record-breaking heat that we now have. We had our earliest triple-digit days in both California and Arizona reported, and then subsequently now looking at breaking a lot more records for peak temperatures, and I'll show you guys those as well. But it's not just us. India had the exact same thing. Looking at some of the other concerns going on, avalanches a problem where, that's right, both in Utah and over in the Alps. So again, it's never just us going through these events. They're all happening. You'll notice over in Italy, we passed off our last severe weather event as it caused significant damage and destruction here in the US. When over there, it's doing the exact same thing there. So we're watching the floods that are hitting the Middle East. We're watching the floods that hit over in Saudi Arabia about a week ago, looking at the damages as they move through regions so that we're able to see, is any one area handling these events better? What kind of impacts could be on the horizon? Now, onto our super El Nino versus our typical season. What does it mean for you? I honestly don't think everyone needs to be focused on this. I'm going to foot stomp that I think it's an overhype of a situation. It is an awareness of climatological shifting. I love that. I don't love that we're trying to attribute it for every major event that we're anticipating to see this year. Again, looking at the last decade of abnormal temperatures, it's been warmer every year. So this means if our last 10 years have been our hottest years on record and we didn't have a super El Nino then, and we're talking about how much warmer it's going to make us, I'm not going to lie, it does not seem like people were looking the last few years at what even a normal trend analysis would have looked like going forward for 2027, which is when we're really talking about these impacts. These are not going to be impacts for our summer, this current summer. We're likely going to be in a neutral for the start of our summer, transitioning by the end of summer going into fall for the super El Nino sort of mindset. So again, a lot of us want to preemptively attribute this for why our summer is going to be hot. It's not this summer we're talking about, nor is it likely that this El Nino is going to prevail as long as our La Niñas typically do. So El Nino, when was the last time we saw a similar event? The 2015 to 2016 period. Now, a lot of you have pain points that happened during that time. Those pain points were, we had the spring flooding destruction in the Carolinas where we had ripple effect dam failures. We had devastating heat waves. We had Texas, Oklahoma floods. We had severe weather across the West Coast. We had wildfires, record warm year then. It's been a record warm year every year since then. So annotating that. The main impacts that we're just looking at here is to be aware of how this can change your pattern flow for storms coming off the Pacific. So really just paying attention to the pattern. So some of the other things for when we're talking about winter is that this is going to have some impact on our monsoon. But again, what impact on our monsoon? Well, let's look at neutral versus La Nina. It's a 50-50 split half the time. When we're looking at, does it cause more? Does it cause less? I constantly advocate that we want to use this like we use the gophers, right? Oh, it's going to be bad. It's going to be good. It's a continuous pivot in how we understand winter and fall because these changes are record setting. So this is important to understand when we're talking about long-term forecasting. The models are not necessarily reliable based off of historics because we're violating historics every month at this point. So it's not a good trend analysis to say we're looking for XYZ because of the strong El Nino or super El Nino association. I want to make sure that we foot stomp that for when we're having these discussions. Here are some additional graphics in case you really feel like playing around with the data. I went ahead and I pulled pretty much everything of applicability that you'd be able to look at, whether it was a strong El Nino, a standard El Nino, a super El Nino, just, looking at where does it typically rain. And again, this also matches up a lot with the NOAA long-term forecast. So just continue to monitor those is all I'm saying. Also to be aware of our 500 millibar temperatures. You'll be able to watch the storms go over the water, which is really the main trigger point, and the level of moisture advection that they bring in coming through that. Now, looking at our tropical weather season, I promised you guys a sneak peek at what some of these people are willing to put out and attach their names to. Quite a few different groups have put out a 2026 forecast. So we've got a pretty average year based off of what they're forecasting. I'm not going to put my name to any one of these forecasts. I get the average that they're assigning it to and why. But again, when we utilize things like historics for our forecast, we can end up shooting ourselves in the foot because we're relying on the historics to be accurate and applicable. And that's not necessarily a good thing to do when we're saying all of these are violating trends. Same thing with the El Nino. But what we are going to look for is where our steering flow is located. Steering flow is a big conversation. Where's the Bermuda High? I want all of you to focus this year on the Bermuda High versus the Azores High. There are two main highs. They trigger all of our flow for our storms coming off of Africa, not for our Gulf. Our Gulf plays a lot with both our continental steering and the tropic steering, so you have a little bit more information you need to play with when we're looking at the Gulf. However, keep an eye on steering flow. I'll walk you guys through that every 2 weeks. As we get closer, you'll always see a slide in here referencing it so that you're able to pay more attention. But again, looking at where we typically see our strongest and our more intense storms, or where we typically see storms after the midpoint, everybody stops paying attention when it comes to September, and then they act surprised come October and November when we have storms. So there's some fun graphics, different areas that have been put in. So I always include these. Our names, again, reiterating this, our names repeat every 6 years. Every 6 years they repeat, which means the 2020 name list is repeating all names which were not retired. So you're going to say, well, these look familiar. Bigger problem. AI, I brought this up last year, will preemptively attach different stats from old storms if you ask it about a current storm with the same name. It will not differentiate because they're the same basin, same name, tropical cyclone. So this becomes a bigger issue when we go forward, that you need to be cross-checking your data against what is actually going to be applicable. So looking at some of the other fun things on the horizon, the aurora. How do we watch the aurora? I've had people message me before just inquiring where they would find out where this is at. So the NOAA puts out a beautiful space weather forecast. Military people also get space weather training. We have a pretty decent sized group over there in Australia on the base that do a lot of our space weather analysis and data repository. So you'll notice here just the aurora dashboard, which is public facing, and the link is right there. You'll be able to see how far out they go with them. So they state, because the cyclical patterns are pretty cyclical, they can give you a forward leaning look at a lot of these things. I went ahead and I include the solar cycle. You can back it up all the way to when they first started sort of assigning information back in 1750 to now. And that kind of helps to keep you from going too far forward in the most recent solar conversations. A lot of people say, does space weather contribute to our severe weather, extreme weather, abnormal heating? The answer is going to be not in the way that you think. It does not cause rain. It does not cause tropical cyclones, and it does not cause severe weather outbreak. However, it can contribute to some of the ionospheric charge when it comes to things like space winds. And there's a bunch of research papers to figure out if that contributes to our lightning side of the house, just the availability for stronger, more potent lightning strikes. It does not cause tropical cyclones or heat waves, annotating that. So this is just a really fun website that they've got for it. They have a bunch of different dashboards I highly recommend everyone play with. The new sea level rise study that came out annotates that everyone's been wrong all along. That's how I read it. So I do love any sort of contrarian study that comes out that says you didn't consider X, Y, Z. So this has gone through and it says that we didn't use the proper baseline. Now that sounds familiar with the Colorado River system, doesn't it? Where we assigned the amount of water everyone would be getting based off of a flow rate that hasn't existed since forever, essentially. And we haven't updated it since then. So now all of our parameters for that river are technically incorrect. Very similar concept for the sea level rise study that says we're arguably far worse off than we realize, and there are way more people at risk of the sea level rise than originally annotated in studies provided by numerous international scientific communities. So I recommend, if you have the time, read the paper. If not, read the summary I've put in on this. Bring it to the attention of anyone who does sea level rise mapping and ask if they're willing to refute the paper if they believe that this is not accurate. Again, love contrarian reports. Anybody who's willing to say something outside of the norm based off of definitive evidence that they have. So they've put in empirical studies. There and by this should be a very easy one-to-one exchange. If we did not account for it, we should be updating our graphics. This includes groups like Climate Central, who did the Toxic Tides report, highlighting all of our hazardous sites located along major water bodies. Looking at where our snow depth is at out west, our snowpack's not doing great. Snowpack out east also not doing great. We're not doing great, guys. We did get a lot of snow, yay. It did not stick around. Our higher elevation snow is already showing signs. Premature snowpack melting, tons of reports on that just across the board. This is going to result in some pretty significant water allocation fights. We've seen similar fights about whether or not data centers or certain communities should be getting water in Ireland a couple of years ago. Ireland is one of the main internet traffic hubs for Europe. So when we're looking at comparing some of the problems on the horizon, I will say that their general population got very upset when they found out they were in drought restrictions, but the data centers were not. So that's something to keep in the back of your mind as we go forward in the concept of water wars. But other issues, people have this general understanding of things like desalination plants and snow making and rain making, and they think that these are viable solutions on the horizon. I want to annotate these are not viable solutions for the scale of the problem that we have. While desal sounds great, the force of energy power that you need to move things from the coastline further into the US when it comes to the weight of water is a very expensive problem. So when we're looking at, Arizona will just put in a desal plant off of Mexico's coast, that's a bigger issue because I can tell you right now that the security and the ability to maintain not only the pipe in and of itself, but the actuality of moving the water across that region and into Arizona, quite expensive. Doing it across any basin, expensive. Looking more at what essentially Israel did way back in the 1970s is water recycling. And that's at every single level of the water system. That is not just simply some buildings do it. It is a all or nothing kind of an approach that Israel's done, which is how they've become one of the major water exporters in their region. Looking at some of the other issues, you'll notice our total snow cover graphic down here in the center part of the slides. Not good. That's a very bad number. Arguably, it's one of our lowest. A couple of different states are very concerned about this. But look where we're getting all of our snow. Over here, Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, taking on some pretty significant snowfall totals. Looking at more than 3 feet of snow from that blizzard that crossed through the region. On top of that, they're anticipating even more ice in the coming forecast, which I'll highlight. I feel really bad for Michigan. They've definitely taken some pretty big hits after taking hits last year. It's going to continue to be the trend. Looking at our average snow cover duration is important. How long is our snow sticking around? It's not sticking around, guys. This is a very red graphic for a time at which we have just a couple of weeks left to try to pull ourselves out of it. And by pull ourselves out of it, there's nothing we can do. There is a heat dome that's in effect. That's going to eat away at everything that's left by the time the heat dome breaks down at the end of the month. So for the next week and a half, that heat dome is going to dominate a lot of this forecast. It will not break down until the last couple of days of March. And at that point, yes, we will see storms kick off, but the soil, the trees, and everything else is going to have taken such a large hit that by the time we get the precipitation, it'll be just like what just happened in Hawaii. It's going to be too much at once. The soil will not be able to hold it back, and a lot of the trees are going to go down with it. So where are we at right now with the different river systems? Mississippi River, not doing awesome. I'm not a huge fan of where we're at with that either. We are looking for some major concerns as not only the drought continues to grow, but the cost to operate on the Mississippi because of our oil price variances. These barges are also noticing a pretty notable hit going on and being able to move critical supplies like grain down the Mississippi River system. So you'll just notice here, California, some of the reservoirs doing pretty great. That's good. We want that because California grows pretty much all of the nation's fruits and vegetables. However, again, it's not connected to the Colorado River system. So just because you see high numbers in one area does not mean you're going to see those high numbers carry forward. So keeping in mind, while they have been better off in drought than every other state, essentially, that does not mean that that's going to benefit the other states. It just means that you don't have to worry about them as much right now in comparison with the other 45 states that I am concerned about. When we're looking at some of the other concerns, Lake Powell, Lake Mead, definitely having those conversations about Deadpool come the end of this year for our hydroelectric conversations. Looking at some of the other problem sets, the Elephant Butte Reservoir over there in New Mexico is doing better. Yay. Unfortunately, 12% doesn't sound great, but it is 10% higher than the cataclysmic level I was looking at it being at come this time when we were looking at this 6 months ago. Bigger issues on the horizon, obviously going to be the water fights. Texas has been relatively aggressive about suing when it comes to New Mexico and Mexico for water because water is just not flowing into the Rio Grande the way it's supposed to, as well as some of the other key basins. This is going to continue to be an issue for Border Patrol in the area. Low-flowing river systems means people can walk across. So this becomes a national security issue very quickly. That's something to keep in the back of your mind. Other problem sets as we go forward is our soil moisture drought indicators are throwing up flags in key basins. Everything from Ohio to the south to the west. To the mid-Atlantic, we're noticing some of our vegetative concerns. It's really going to hit our key crop productions. Winter wheat is looking to be pretty far down. As we go forward, just be aware that it is getting significantly worse in our central plains, and I do not have a lot of positive news in the 10-day forecast. Our fires right now, Nebraska, Central Plains are really leading the way. We've pivoted. It was Florida, then it was Texas for a little bit. Now it's Nebraska. Nebraska right now, pretty notable amount of acres burning, more than 750,000 acres on fire. The largest fires in state history. So we've hit another record. We had this with New Jersey, with Florida, with Texas. All these states reporting record fires in the last 4 or 5 years. This is getting to be a big issue, but it is also a worse issue because we are anticipating one for that smoke. You can see where it covers in the map. It's a pretty substantial area. That smoke feeds algae blooms. It also obviously deteriorates your quality of air and subsequently impacts your human body. Sure. Other problem sets, we're expecting for very damaging strong winds over the coming days. Fires that are burning between now and the end of the week, by the end of the weekend, are going to see some pretty significant wind events. So where are we going forward over the next couple of weeks? It's just going to be warm out west. It's going to mess with a lot of our water supplies. The areas that get the precipitation, the Great Lakes don't arguably need, because it's not moving into the Ohio River Valley where we need that precipitation. It's hitting the same areas over and over and over again. So when I mentioned death by 1,000 paper cuts, this is kind of what I'm talking about. These weather events are kind of stalling out because the weather pattern is stalling out. So I just want to make sure that we're keeping in mind where some of these impacts. We're also annotating new studies coming on. We're seeing a pretty big decline in our fishery in the Gulf of Mexico, Gulf of America, whatever you want to call it at this point. The bigger issue as we go forward is we're losing crops, we're losing cattle, and we're losing fisheries. So it's going to become a pretty big issue internationally for who we're selling to, the economy side of the house, who we're buying from on size, quality, all of these subsequent factors. Here are some graphics from Climate Central from earlier today. They do these wonderful monthly outlook seminars where they talk about the last month of weather events. So I went ahead and snipped some of their key things, but I did send it out in the last email in the webinar you guys can sign up for. I'll continue to tout their good work. So here's just some of our different stats from February. Different ways to keep in mind where we're at, where we're going, and of course, other trends on the horizon. These are some of the fun things for the western half of the United States. Abnormal temperatures, drought conditions. Some areas saw a lot of precipitation. Very positive. Downside, didn't stick around. Winds are getting too strong. You'll notice our temperature categories over here in the upper right-hand corner. These are their current temperatures for the forecast and then the records. And you'll notice how many of them are being broken. Everywhere from Colorado into Arizona and Las Vegas have hit new temperature records. as we go forward, what are we anticipating for weather? What is in our upper levels? Please tell me all of you have gotten used to the Knoll School tool so that you can see where our beautiful heat dome is. It's over here. I put the little H for high pressure. That is where all of the warm air is going to be coming up and over the U.S., but it's camped out. So when we're looking at why the pattern is what it is, why our storms are going the way they are, this is the flow. You'll notice upstream, there's another ridge and another very deep low pressure system mimicking ours over Russia right now. We pay attention to Russia for an outlook about 2 weeks in advance, up to about 2.5 weeks if they slow down. So we're going to see this ridge come in, this low come in. It's going to break down part of this. It's a whole mechanism. So when I say it's going to be the end of the month for this high pressure to break down, I do mean by the time it breaks down, it'll be with a very violent storm system. It's the only way to break it down. You can't break down a high without a violent low. So for the next couple of days, where's our moisture coming in? Only the north. The high pressure is dominating the desert southwest, which causes our storms to ride the merry-go-round up and over, which many times skips our central plains. They will still see the winds and they'll still see severe weather in increments, but they're not going to see meaningful persisting precipitation. They'll see pop-up thunderstorms in brief waves that move very quickly. We are expecting ice over there in Michigan, so just under a tenth of an inch, so not a whole lot going on, but just other things to be aware of because they're in a very sensitive state. I've also gone ahead and included some of the fun statistics that we have just going forward. When we're talking about these temperature swings, we are expecting, obviously, for it to get warmer again. This weekend over in the DMV area, we're expected to get into the 80s. Multiple areas expected to get into the 80s to 90s. Just across the south, the central U.S., it's very unfortunate because we will be plunging right back down into freezing again. So if you thought we were done with winter, we are not. Don't worry, another violent swing is on the horizon. And the only way to get the violent swing, damaging wind event. So I've gone ahead and spelled that out in the forecast for all of you day by day. You'll be able to start to see it come in through the Pacific Northwest and through our Great Lakes area. And then as we go forward in the forecast, you're going to see our major concern is going to be Thursday to Friday of the coming week. And that's where some of that severe weather is going to kick off. And so I've annotated where some of these storms coming through are going to be responsible for why we're looking at the pivot at the start of April for destabilized weather. But I did go ahead and make sure that I kept in why we look at the GFS and the European when we're talking modeling, never focusing just on one or the other. The GFS is the American, the European is sort of a global one. GFS is also arguably global. It's just who owns them and who's feeding them with what data and who maintains them. When we're looking at some of the other concerns, you'll notice the Mississippi River themselves have flagged concerns because of the drought, the subsequent cost to operate on the river system, and of course the developing AI problem on the horizon, which is the use of water that these systems require. Some of the other concerns is that the desert Southwest has advocated for using water from the Mississippi. They've also tried to ask for water from the Great Lakes. Arguably they're just pulling at straws here. As we go forward, I want to make sure I highlight something that came out, which is AccuWeather tried to forecast how many tornadoes you're going to get per each month. It's a pretty large spread. I will say giving a forecast for the yearly total for tornadic activity is a very far reach. I don't think anyone should be focused on it. I will, however, include it here so we can reference it later and see how accurate it was. Again, I don't think you can do that with any level of validity unless you're looking at historics. And again, we're violating historics left and right. I don't believe in doing that to the level of putting my name on it, so I don't advocate others do, but I will always include them when somebody does. Other things to be aware of as we go forward, if we see a heat dome and somebody else sees a heat dome, the bigger concern is, can it get worse? And when we look at Australia, the answer is yes from their record events. What are we looking at for wind damage? It's going to get notably worse for winds. So you'll notice here I highlighted the 26th. One of my sentences disappeared. I'll have to fix that. The 26th of March for a pretty notable large wind event. That's that low I'm talking about that breaks down our heat dome. That's going to come with some pretty substantial damage to trees, vegetation, wildfire, drought indicators through the way of evaporative demand. And then, of course, where our peak gusts are at, you'll notice the northern plains taking a pretty big hit for continuous wind problems. That means prescribed burns are at risk. And then, of course, the Great Lakes area, looking at those storms coming over and across because that's the pattern flow. And then the dry line for Texas. What is a dry line for Texas? Well, it's usually what helps to feed our severe weather outbreaks. So here's some of our tornado stats. Where are we at right now? If you look online, you'll notice that they don't include the last month and a half in current count because they're still under review. However, to be aware, we've had 234 reported tornadoes just in the last just in the last couple of, or I'm sorry, we've had 205 reported tornadoes since the start of March. So that's in 19 days. Typically, the March timeframe at peak has been 234, so we're approaching it. So we have 2 more weeks, essentially. I'm expecting more severe weather. We could approach and or supersede. I will say that Oklahoma's already hit a new record for most March tornadoes at 20 events already. We're also looking at last month. It was the 4th consecutive February to have an above average number of tornadoes. We're seeing tornadoes earlier in the year, and we're seeing them being a little bit more damaging than we would like. So this is just where we're seeing them compared to average as far as an indicator increase. So just more fun things to be aware of is that if you go and you try to look at the stats right now, they're going to be a little misleading because they aren't taking into account reports. So you want to use NOAA's severe weather reports, add them together off of what they've actually already consolidated, as opposed to using things like Wikipedia. Do not use Wikipedia's storm report page until the end of the year. Looking at our GFS temperature swings, there's our heat dome out west. That looks very unpleasant. It is. Don't worry. It's not supposed to be there this early. We know this. It does break down inevitably. However, this is an anomaly graphic, which means we're going to see a temperature pivot in the opposite direction, because you'll notice this cold pocket develops at the start of April over here in the southwest or southeast. So we're looking at between the two of them, the only way to get from one to the other is with severe weather events. Nowhere in the world right now has notably nice weather. They are all in between either a major weather event in and of itself. I believe Brazil just had a major flood during one of their sporting events. It really comes down to who's recovering fastest. I will say we have a Category 4 tropical cyclone making landfall in Australia right now. Some other fun things that we're going to look at here. The pivots that are required, you'll notice how weird this looks. It should look weird. It's wrong. It shouldn't be happening like this. These are the back and forths in the extreme I'm talking about. Hot to cold, half the U.S., except this is more than half the U.S. And then that cold comes back in. This is the 24th. And then the 27th, you'll notice the heat replaces the cold, but then more cold moves into the Pacific Northwest. It's literally a 50-50 almost with some of these. Our crops can't handle that. I went ahead and included, we're losing notable amounts of crops. 50% of crops lost in Florida from the cooperatives reported for bell peppers and squash, 20% down for tomatoes. So I've gone ahead and included our beef sector is also nearing 1 full year without access to the Chinese market. So we're going to see some price increases on top of price increases on top of price increases. I don't have anything positive there. The freeze-thaw cycle for these plants is going to get really aggressive. Don't worry, spring's coming earlier. Yay! So this is also a new graphic that was just released by Climate Central. This also breaks it down by city, so you can go in and play with this. I'll start including it in my presentation decks as we go forward, but you'll notice I've put in the link here, so some more fun stats for you guys. Look, somebody went through the Iowa Mesonet page and started consolidating gusts. Is it getting windier? Some areas are saying, yes, the strong winds are increasing, but their prevailing average winds are decreasing. So we're, again, moving more towards extremes. This is how you play with these data sets. Highly recommend going and playing around with this data set for your particular area and being able to create graphics like this to communicate the threat on the horizon to stakeholders and why they should be paying attention. So just really quickly before I lose all of you, when we're looking at Zoom Earth, which I know is not a federal tool, but it's a good tool, you can zoom in on tropical weather like this beautiful, what was Category 5 going into a Category 4 for landfall in a relatively remote area of Australia. But what does this mean? Well, look at how quickly this thing formed. March 18th, 24 hours, guys. 24 hours, developed as a Cat 3, arguably didn't really have a whole lot of life before it. Cat 3 noticed, all of a sudden jumps to Cat 5 landfall. Can you imagine being an emergency manager with about 36 hours of heads up for a Cat 5 approaching you? So when we're talking about the threats, we're looking at what's going on in other countries. What are they doing about it? Look at the level of severe weather that's breaking out across this region. You'll remember the tail end of last year, we lost 1,400 people across Asia from flooding events. So again, what other events are on the horizon for other areas of interest? If we're focused on this particular area, we're looking at the severe weather reports that we can access from Saudi Arabia's social media. Are you going to find it in the news? Probably not. You can also look at some of these and look for key indicators in their upper level flow, like where's their troughing coming in? What does it look most like? You can play around with all of these different models and see some of these damaging weather events as they come through with devastating winds in the future. And then I want to make sure that I show you guys this platform in case you didn't know is here. It's the Global Disaster Awareness and Coordination System. Shows you all the different key reports that are just going on in different areas, such as earthquakes. And then, of course, there's our beautiful tropical cyclone, flood events on the current side of the house, and then droughts and all the rest of these forest fires, things to be aware of. China's on fire right now. Is that in the news? Also, no. Should it be? Yes. Other bigger problems when we're looking at forecasts is how do we get a hold of data when we need data the most? I just want to make sure that everyone knows that these kinds of tools exist so that you can play with some of the different forecasts should you have operations in some of these fun areas. You can see where we might have some notable storm events going on and being able to play with certain fun stats like what happened in 2025. They have this broken out by country. So there's some positive, some negative. The negative, I hate ads, and they're all over this website. So with that, I'll make sure that you guys also get those links, and I'll stop sharing. And we are right at time. If anybody else is in the Northern Virginia area, I'm going to an Affirm event. It's AI and healthcare. I believe it's 3 hours of my life that I'm excited to go and socialize about. So I'm going to go ahead and stop recording, and I can take any questions should anybody have any.